Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So, as you know, I've been making videos on YouTube for 6 years now, and in that time I must have covered hundreds of articles and videos and things like that. And in that time I've seen a lot of weird shit, a lot of strange claims that make you stop and scratch your head, a lot of other claims which are just fucking hilarious. They're so insane and so stupid. But I've also covered a lot of things which have made me extremely angry. Now, I try not to be angry when I make these videos. I just try to stick to logic and reason and evidence. But, you know, sometimes it gets a little bit too much. And I've also covered things which have made me really despair for the future. And the thing I'm covering today fills those last two slots. The thing I'm covering today made me extremely angry and also makes me despair for the future. Because I suspect we're dealing with a whole lost generation of brainwashed morons. And I don't think there's saving a lot of them, unfortunately. I think they will always believe the things they believe, and no matter what arguments you make or what evidence you show, they won't shift their position. They'll just call you a Nazi and move on. So yes, this video is going to be filled with things that will make you angry and despair for the future. So you might want to pause it right here and go pour yourself a stiff drink. But either way, you've been warned. So what am I talking about? Well, last night I watched the latest episode of the new series of the Twilight Zone, or the Social Justice Zone, as I think it should now be called. The previous issues have touched on social justice things, some more than others, but hasn't been anywhere near as over the top as last night's episode, which is really nothing but anti-male propaganda. Now, you think the Gillette ad was bad, or the recent ad I covered from the Victorian government, which is criticising men looking at women on trains. No, they don't compare to last night's episode of The Twilight Zone. Just the title should be enough to illustrate this to you. Yeah, the episode was called Not All Men. I wonder where this is going to go. So let me give you a brief synopsis of what actually happened in this piece of shit propaganda. We start with the protagonist, the main character, who's a young woman who works in an office, and a guy in the office convinces her to go over to his place to watch a meteor shower that night and, you know, have a couple of drinks and a meal. He seems like a nice enough guy. They're obviously into each other and attracted to one another. And this is kind of like a first date. And so we see her over his place and things are going well. He seems like a really nice guy. And we see the meteor shower go overhead. And it's a lot closer than they thought it was originally going to be. In fact, meteorites hit all over the town and one lands in their backyard. So they go out to look at it and the guy picks it up and he's handling it and making a couple of jokes, and they go back to his house, and suddenly he starts acting very differently. He starts acting aggressive in a sexual manner. She makes an excuse and leaves, and he gets pissed off. And this continues the next day when she's just out in public. She's looking at males, and they all seem to be acting aggressive and angry, and one guy grabs another woman on the arse. But it's just the males doing it. It's just the males acting in a very feminist, stereotypical, toxic masculinity way. You know, all the stereotypes of toxic masculinity that feminists constantly bring up, that's basically what we're seeing, and it gets worse. So, later that night, the main character goes to her sister's place to have dinner because it's the sister's birthday, and we're introduced to her husband, who seems like a nice guy at this point, and the sister's son, or the main character's nephew, who also seems like a fairly nice kid. I think he's about 17 or something like that. So the sister and the main character go off to a bar where they're chatting, and the men in the background are getting more and more aggressive and assertive and yelling and making noise, and they eventually get into a bar fight, and the two sisters leave. Now, I should point out that the men in the bar are drinking shots with fragments of the meteor in their shot glass for some reason. Apparently this is something that men do. They pick up rocks that have fallen from the sky and they put them in their drinks. I see, I didn't know this, but apparently this is what we do, right? So the two sisters leave, and as they're leaving, they bump into another guy who's just got off his bike, and apparently he works with the main character, and he says, "Oh, I think I've seen you in the office." And she's still a bit disturbed from just seeing the fight in the bar, so she kind of brushes him off. And he gets really upset about this. And he lets her know it, "Oh, I'm not good enough to talk to," or something like that, right? And they get even more disturbed and make it to their car and drive off, and he follows them on his motorbike. He's now stalking them. And he follows them back to their house. They run inside and lock the door, and they tell the sister's husband, who then goes at the front and murders the guy, beats him to a pulp and kills him. And when the husband comes back in the house, he's off his head in a rage. Obviously, he's been infected by the meteorites too. And it's around this point that the main character comes to the conclusion that it must be the meteors. That's what's causing all the men to act this way. And it's just the men too. Now, some of you might know what the twist is going to be at the end of this episode. I thought it was pretty fucking obvious, and I was right, but we'll get to that soon enough. So the two sisters are walking down the street, and it's just chaos out in the street. Men are going nuts. They're destroying things and setting things on fire and beating the shit out of each other. And it's like a war zone, right? So the two sisters decide to go and find the nephew, who is at his boyfriend's houseboat. And we cut to the scene of the two young guys, and the boyfriend is drinking a beer with a fragment of the meteorite in it, and he tries to get the nephew to drink it, but he doesn't. And then the boyfriend forces himself onto the nephew. And the nephew has to fend him off, right, because he's not in the mood for sex. So he forces the aggressive boyfriend off and flees from the houseboat, locking him in the houseboat, because the boyfriend's now going nuts, as all the men are, except for the nephew for some reason. So the two sisters turn up at this houseboat. They're talking to the nephew, saying what's going on, and he's trying to explain what's just happened. And then the guy from the start of the episode, the guy that the main character works with, the one she went on the date with, he turns up. And he's, once again, just off his head, aggressive, angry, all the negative male stereotypes you can cram into one piece of feminist propaganda. That's what we're seeing here. And he confronts her and starts to strangle her. And it's at this point that the nephew starts to transform as well. His eyes change and the veins in his head pulse. And the sister, his mother, is trying to calm him down. And the nephew calms himself down. He decides that he's not going to transform into this evil, aggressive male. And he stops himself. And it's at this point that a helicopter goes overhead, and the light distracts the guy, who is trying to kill the main character, and she frees herself and throws him in the river, killing him, or the ocean, killing him. All of a sudden, the military turn up and take the two sisters and the nephew to safety, and we see like a makeshift military tent which they're using to treat people. And one of the doctors says, "We've run blood tests and it doesn't seem to be anything in their blood. It doesn't seem to be chemical based or some kind of transmitted disease. We don't have any idea what it is or what's causing it." And it's at this point that we get the twist, which, like I said, I thought was pretty fucking obvious, and I guess most of you also have seen coming a mile away. The twist is that the main character figures out the twist, and that is, it's not caused by the meteors. Men are just naturally this way. This is the way men naturally are. They're just naturally aggressive, misogynistic monsters who want to destroy each other and victimize women and destroy society. That's just the way men are. And the meteors were acting as a placebo, as the main character said, giving them an excuse to just let loose. Of course, this doesn't really explain the fact that their eyes change and their veins bulge, but, this is feminist propaganda, so it doesn't have to make sense. And the nephew explains that he felt himself transforming, but he stopped himself. And that's the proof that it's not actually a toxin or a disease which is causing this. It's men's choice. Men are choosing to be evil and to be wrong and aggressive and violent. And this is a fucking disgusting piece of anti-male propaganda. Some of the worst I've ever seen on TV. Possibly the worst I've seen on TV. It is essentially female supremacy because it's saying that women do not suffer from these things. Well, they suffer second-hand through the evil males doing it to them, but women aren't aggressive or violent or abusive. They don't rape or cause harm or anything like that. No, these are only things that men do, that all men do, that all men are capable of doing unless they get woke and choose not to. Oh, that's another thing. The terms woke and mansplaining were also used in the episode, but you know that's a minor point compared to the rest of the anti-male fucking bullshit in it. Yeah, so this is female supremacy. It's saying that women are morally superior to men in every way, and that they do no wrong, they cause no harm. This is something that only men do. Now, let me ask you, imagine that we swapped the genders. Imagine it was an episode where the meteors supposedly turned women into every single fucking negative stereotype about women that you can imagine. Every single stereotype that feminists would consider misogynistic and proof that men hate women. It turned all the women into gold diggers who constantly had high levels of PMS. They also had baby rabies and wanted to get pregnant instantly. They were also murdering their own children because we all know that women are twice as likely to do that as men. And they were overly emotional and illogical because, you know, they're negative female stereotypes that feminists don't like. So we'd have to throw them in too. And I'm sure there are, you know, dozens and dozens of other negative female stereotypes we could lump in. Imagine that episode aired instead. Could you imagine the fucking outroar? Could you imagine the cries of misogyny? Could you imagine the constant pleas of, this is why we have to smash the patriarchy? This is proof that women are oppressed by the evil men. It would be deafening, and I suspect that the writer of that episode would never, ever write on TV again, and the TV network would be issuing a fucking apology. What if we swapped out gender for race? So instead of it affecting men, what if the meteorites supposedly affect African Americans or Muslims? Suddenly, anyone of Middle Eastern background is running around blowing things up. I'm sure that would be labelled as Islamophobia, right? Especially the twist at the end where we find out that it's not actually the meteors, but you know, this is just people of Arab descent, right? This is just the way they normally act. That wouldn't be considered propaganda at all, would it? So this is a vile piece of anti-male propaganda. It's designed to elevate women morally and to pull down men and basically compare us to primitive animals. This is really no different than the propaganda that the Nazis used against Jews prior to World War II. Now, before someone strawmans me, I'm not suggesting that women are planning to put all men into concentration camps and gases, okay? Not suggesting that at all. But I'm looking at the propaganda I saw last night and comparing it to the same type of propaganda the Nazis used. You dehumanize a group of people while elevating another group on a moral scale. It's no different. It suggests that only men are capable of doing these things. Only men are violent. Only men are cruel. Only men use sexual violence. Only men murder. And that's bullshit. It is 100% fucking bullshit. So I thought I'd have a look at the writer of this particular episode. And the writer of this particular episode is apparently a comedian. Okay. I don't know, I don't find being a bigot to be particularly funny, but I guess humour is subjective, right? Anyway, her name is Heather Ann Campbell. And I thought I'd have a look at her Twitter feed and have a search for the term men. And I found some very interesting things, so let's have a look at some of them. Now, the first example, she's replying to Bill O'Reilly, and she says, if men knew how to accept no, she'd be alive and you'd still have your job. Men in general apparently don't understand what the term no means. But only men, and it's all men as well. It's not just some men, it's not a minority of men, it's not that some women also do this. No, it's a male thing, and it's apparently it's all men. It's a male characteristic. Nothing bigoted or sexist about that whatsoever. The next example, she says, if you told boys in the 80s that She-Ra was for guys, they would have laughed at you. If you tell men in 2018 that She-Ra is for girls, they scream about it on the internet. Well, I kind of suspect that she's missing the point. But it's interesting that she says She-Ra is for girls, right? Considering a lot of things that are basically male-orientated have been now deemed to have to change, so they're more acceptable for girls. We have to make male-orientated media to be more acceptable and more inclusive of girls. But at the same time, things which are orientated for girls, we have to keep just for girls, apparently. But, that's really not that an important tweet. There's a lot more interesting ones I want to get to. The next tweet is, it wasn't fans that harassed Tran off Instagram. It was men. Really? So you personally went through every single harassing email that Kelly Tran supposedly got. Is that right? Well, you obviously spent a lot of time doing that, Heather Ann. But anyway, she goes on to say, stop ungendering these problems and blaming people, a term which includes women. It's not women. Something is happening to men. Yes. Now let's keep that in mind, that there are no women hassling other women on the internet, guys. It's only men. It's men doing it to women, right? This is clearly a gendered problem, and something is happening to men. This is a phrase that she uses numerous times, and isn't it surprising considering the piece of excrement that passed as television that I watched last night, the piece of feminist propaganda, which was meant to be a science fiction show. Instead, it was anti-male propaganda. She goes on to say, if you complain about casting women in beloved franchises, fine. We'll cast only men. In all the girl roles, too. You can watch them fuck. Okay, so remember, guys, movies, remakes like, say, Ghostbusters, which changes the gender of the main characters. That's perfectly fine because it has to be more inclusive for women. But She-Ra is only for girls. And if any males comment on it, they're misogynistic crybabies, right? You have to remember the rules here. This is a double standard, and it's perfectly acceptable because feminism is about equality or something like that. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. It's another one based on She-Ra, Toys for Men's Pleasure 2018. Well, look, I think whatever floats your boat. If men want to play with these toys, that's perfectly fine. Just as if girls want to play with G.I. Joe or Star Wars toys, right? What's wrong with that? It's amazing how she doesn't realise the double standards that feminism is filled with, right? Oh, and here we have something is happening to men again. Like I said, this is a phrase that she repeats repeatedly because apparently women do no wrong. It's only men. It must be the meteors, which is changing men into toxic animals. The next tweet says, Pizzagate, ridiculous conspiracy theory about pedophiles. Right, lock her up. Milo, we should let men fuck kids. Right. Please speak at CPAC. Okay, I must have missed this. When exactly did Milo say that it was okay to fuck kids? He's actually a victim of sexual abuse as a child. I don't recall him saying at any point that it should be okay for adult men to fuck kids. Yeah, that sounds pretty slanderous to me. If I was Milo, I think I'd be contacting a lawyer. Calling someone pro-pedophile is a pretty serious crime in my book. Now, this next one's just strange. The Ewoks beat men to death with rocks. Imagine the pain of being bashed on your helmet until you were dead. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I guess that passes as humour these days. I don't know. Okay, so the next tweet. Just skip to the part where we never vote for president again and the streets are lined with American flags and women have a curfew to protect men from false allegations and the immigration rate is 0, but it's all normal because you can still get a $6 cup of coffee in Echo Park. Okay. I don't think a curfew for women is going to protect men from false allegations. But the interesting thing is that feminists, particularly radical feminists, have been proposing curfews for men since the 70s. I'm guessing Heather Ann Campbell would actually support that, though, considering, men are out-of-control animals. Maybe all men should be kept in zoos as well. She'd probably be okay with that, I'm guessing, based on her level of anti-male propaganda. This next one's interesting. She says, it's not a mental health problem because women have mental health issues too. It's not an access to guns problem because women have access to guns too. It's a problem with men. This doesn't mean that men are all a problem, but this problem is specifically a male one. Really? So the next time a mother murders her children and then pleads mental health issues, I'm guessing you'll say, nah, not really. It's not a mental health issue. It's clearly a female issue because, men have access to children too, and men suffer mental health. So, I guess it's just the fact that she's a woman, right? That doesn't sound misogynistic at all. This next one's also very interesting. She's replying to a tweet that says, if World War II happened now rather than in the 1940s, we would be screwed. From what I've read, a good portion of our fighting force would be busy playing with dolls. Probably She-Ra dolls, apparently. But anyway, Heather Ann Campbell says, because boys should only play with their fists, buried into the skulls of the weak. No reading, no thinking, no creativity, just meat and anger, and the trauma of war visited on multiple generations. On all sides, boys moulded into men, infused with rage, screaming and killing. Yeah, that's what he must have been saying. Yeah, I think it's great that Heather Ann Campbell is so pro-male, clearly. She goes on to say in another tweet, the straight men afraid of gay men in bathrooms are only afraid of anybody thinking about them in the horrible ways they think about women. Yeah, so men thinking about women sexually is horrible, and apparently we're afraid of gay men thinking of us in that same way. I guess men are privileged in the sense that women never have sexual fantasies or desires towards men and never think about men in sexual ways, right? Because I guess we can, we're spared that horror, that fucking horror. Apparently. I wonder who's buying all the romance novels. It must be the gay men. I don't know. And then she tweets a number of headlines about men killing women. Of course. I mean, what a surprise. Maybe I should find some headlines of mothers killing their children and tweet them at her. But I That would probably get me banned from Twitter. At this point, I really wouldn't care. She says, just overheard 2 Pentagon officials say that Captain Marvel was mandated to be a woman because part of Obama's deep state agenda was brainwashing men to believe they can't star in every movie. Okay. I guess the question is, where did you overhear these 2 Pentagon officials? And how do you know they're Pentagon officials? Did you overhear them in a bar? Were you at the Pentagon? Did you see them on TV? I don't know. It's really not clear. And who cares that they're Pentagon officials? Why does that make... I don't know. I give up. This one says, face it, ladies, that Trump tape, that's just how men talk when you're not around. Some dude who said, not all men. Yep. So, Heather... have you ever been around women when they're talking about men? Have you ever heard them talk about men in a sexual way? I know for a fact that they do. But apparently that's okay. It's perfectly okay for women to talk about men in sexual ways. But it's wrong. It's wrong for the dirty, disgusting men to talk about women in any sexual way, because women are these pure, clean creatures. And how dare men think about these holy creatures in such a demeaning way? But this last one is really, really interesting. She says, if accusing someone of sexual assault is a good way to get famous and get attention, why don't more men say they were raped? Well, I think I might have the answer to that one, Heather. It's because society doesn't give a shit about men who have been raped, especially if those men have been raped by women. And I think you're a perfect example of this, considering you only see men doing evil shit and see women as being pure and victim-like. So I'm pretty sure you wouldn't believe a claim of a woman raping a man. And male victims of female rapists are something that society tends to laugh at.
What constitutes rape?
What do you mean?
Like, what are the rules?
Broadly speaking, if you ride someone and they don't want ridden, you've raped them.
You better not have raped me last night, Packy. I'm serious.
Of course I didn't rape you. Didn't rape anybody. Steph raped me.
You stupid bastard. I warned you about leaving that bathroom window open, but would you listen? And now look what's happened. You've gone and got yourself raped.
That's why someone making that claim, a man making that claim, would not become famous. Well, not famous in a sympathetic way. He'd be a laughing stock. So anyway, folks, I hope you enjoyed this video about this feminist bigot who I think, based on what I've read and seen, is a fucking disgusting human being. And the fact that I think we're breeding a generation of people like this who believe this shit, it really does make me lose hope for the future. Yeah. It basically makes me want to drink myself into a coma. And that's not good. So, out of curiosity, I did a search in Heather Ann Campbell's Twitter feed to see if she's mentioned the men's rights movement at any time. And surprisingly, I didn't find her mentioning MRAs or men's rights anywhere. Maybe she's never heard of us. But I did find someone responding to her mentioning MRAs, and I think it's an interesting conversation which I quickly want to look at. So, Heather Ann Campbell started out by saying, Twitter, the website where every sentence might win you the chance to talk to 1,000 Nazis. And someone replied to her saying, or a million far lefts that just call a person a Nazi because their opinions differ from theirs. And I think that's a fair response, because the term Nazi is thrown around way too easily these days, as we're about to see, right? Now, it's the response to this guy that I really want to focus on. It's by someone called Amy Bow, and she says, maybe because MRAs sail in the same boat as the Nazi Party. Really? So the Nazis want to end infant male circumcision, bring down the number of male suicides, and tackle issues like male homelessness. Well, that's interesting. I didn't think they were interested in those things, but if that's the case, if the Nazis are actually interested in those things, they're way ahead of the feminists, let me put it that way. But it's interesting that she brings up MRAs, considering Heather Ann Campbell, or the guy that responded to her, never mentioned MRAs. So I'm not exactly sure why Amy Bow would bring it up. Maybe she's just assuming that everyone who's a male who isn't to the left of in politics is automatically an MRA, which is a fairly common assumption by people like this. But anyway, let's read on because it gets more interesting. She says, ask yourself why you share some of the same ideology as the Nazi Party before you can complain about people calling out your similarities to the Nazis. Okay. Once again, he never mentioned MRAs, so it's strange that she would bring it up. And I'm not exactly sure how MRAs are similar to Nazis. Yeah, okay. She goes on to say, it's not the feminism that is the problem. Look in the mirror. Yeah, well, interesting comment, Amy Bow. Now, someone else responds by saying, just what similarities are those? And Amy Bow informs us. Yeah, it's good of her to do this, taking her time to explain to us how MRAs and Nazis are basically the same thing. So she says, MRAs, the Nazis, and the National Socialist Movement all share the misogynistic ideology. The misogynistic ideology, yes. Saying, we should care about male victims of domestic abuse is clearly misogyny because, as we know, only males can be perpetrators and only females can be victims. So, yeah, clearly anyone who suggests that males can be victims too hates women. It's so clear now that Amy has pointed it out to us. She goes on to say, quite often MRA groups and beliefs, as well as racism, end up morphing into full-blown neo-Nazi beliefs and attitudes. Well, this is true. I mean, people start out by saying, why can't we bring down the rate of male suicide? Because it's a real issue that we need to tackle. And at some point, it's morphed through some kind of internet magic into why don't we gas the Jews? There's a clear progression there. I don't know why more people can't see it. When you say, can we stop male suicide, it's practically the same thing as saying, let's gas the Jews. There's hardly any difference between those two things. The two beliefs are so close. And I think Amy is a real intellectual giant for spotting it when most people are just blind to it. But she goes on to say, not only that, but MRA groups are often targeted by neo-Nazis to scout for members. I think someone's been reading too many BuzzFeed articles. This is what happens when you live in a progressive echo chamber and you force feed yourself a diet of progressive media bullshit. And look who liked the tweet. It was Take Down MRAs, one of the biggest assholes on the internet. What a surprise. What a surprise that fucking asshole would like that tweet. And the funny thing is that Amy Bow, Take Down MRAs, and even Heather Ann Campbell are far more fascist and far more Nazi-like than any MRA I know. And once again, someone calls her out saying, you know a lot for someone not directly involved. And Amy Bow replies, I live in a deeply red district. Neighbours drive around in golf carts with Confederate flags and share racist jokes publicly. Well, that is a warning sign that someone is an MRA. Not that they advocate for men's rights. That's irrelevant, right? But if you see someone driving around in a golf cart with a Confederate flag, yeah, definitely advocating for men's rights. That's the best way to do it. Not trying to bring up issues and talk about them and change policies and spread awareness. Nah, that's got nothing to do with it. It's actually driving around in a golf cart with a Confederate flag. That's it. That's the one requirement. She goes on to say, plenty of racists and Nazis to watch online, plus social studies, too easily available to read. Yeah, but apparently not read with a critical mind, right? No reason to think about what these studies are saying, or to maybe question whether they're biased or not. That would be too hard. It's better just to listen and believe, right? Much easier. She goes on to say, I'm aware of the dangerous people around me and how they cloak themselves. Yeah. Well, I guess one way the Nazis cloak themselves is by pretending to care about issues like male suicide, right? Whenever someone brings up male suicide, you know what they really mean. What they really want to do is just gas the Jews. You can tell because it's like a code word. It's just a way of cloaking what they really mean. But Amy knows. Amy knows because she's read some social science studies on the internet. Yep. Probably not actually read the studies. Maybe heard them mentioned in a BuzzFeed article. But, close enough. Close enough, Amy. I think I'll sleep better at night knowing that we have people on the internet like Amy Bowe ready to defend us from the Nazi hordes. Well done, Amy. Well done.